Good morning. We are here on April 13th and having our Planning Committee meeting. On the committee with me is Dan Hamill, and sitting in for Terry Borneman today will be Michael Lilliquist. We have one item on our agenda. It is the review of the Planning and Community Development Department's 2015 and 2016 Long-Range Planning Work Program. We're here for information-only item to discuss the long-term planning program. And to present it, I will first turn it over to Rick Sepler, our Planning Director.
Members of the committee, it's our pleasure to come before you today to update you on one of our divisions. As you recall, the Planning and Community Development have three. One deals with current planning and permitting. The second deals with community and economic development. And today's presentation focuses on our third, the long-range planning work program. I'm going to turn it over to Assistant Director Greg Alcott, who's going to walk you through what's on our plate this year.
Good morning, Council. Can somebody get the lights, please? Thank you. So for 2015-2016, this is the list of major projects that the Long Range Planning Group is working on. It's a fairly short list, but represents a whole lot of work by a whole lot of people. Updating the comprehensive plan and looking at our urban growth area, the annual amendments process that we do every year, and we have three amendments proposed this year, and two of them you're going to hear, the Council's going to hear tonight. We've got three active annexation petitions, and we're also updating the accessory dwelling unit ordinance. In terms of the comp plan, the basic update requirements are shown on the screen. We have to address changes in the law since 2006 when our current plan was adopted. We have to review, as I said, urban growth area and population growth projections, and also review the critical areas ordinance. And the work on the critical areas ordinance is ongoing. It's the second item on that short list that we'll be spending most of our time on for the next 3 months or so. Context for the update, and this is from the scope of work that was approved by the Planning Commission and Council. We're building on the existing policy foundation that's in the current plan. We're going to include the Council's adopted legacies and strategic commitments as a policy basis. We want to refine and review the existing goals and policies, incorporate new public input that we're getting, and also improve the readability of the plan. In terms of milestones, you can see that we are on the third box on the top row there, Planning Commission UGA recommendation. So we have a meeting scheduled for April 23rd. It's a joint meeting with this committee and the Planning Commission to begin that process of the Commission's review of our urban growth area boundaries and our population growth forecast. That work is scheduled to be completed in May, and then it will come to Council in June and July. We will need to get a recommendation to the county on any changes to our urban growth area boundary and any changes to the preliminary population growth projection by the end of July. Once that's completed, then we'll start work on the individual chapters. All of that work needs to be done by June of 2016. Thought I would just throw in some quick information that we've been looking at and analyzing. This is the population growth, both growth back to the year 2000 and also using the council-approved forecast out to 2036. You can see that we were growing fairly fast in the early part of the 2000s, and then it really flattened out during the Great Recession. And you can see the both for population, which is the light blue, and employment, which is the dark blue. Forecast that we currently have is pretty steady growth over the planning period. It's a pretty aggressive forecast.
Greg, what's the percent growth per year based on that particular growth curve?
I don't know the percentage growth. The numbers are, it's about 1,500 people per year.
Okay. 2.4, you think? Dan?
How does the historic growth and the forecasted growth differ? What's the difference between
Well,
those?
again, I don't know how far we want to get into this today because we're going to be spending a lot of time on this on the 23rd. It depends on the time period that you look at. If you go back to the year 1990 up to 2014, during that 24-year period, we grew by about 1,200 to 1,300 people per year. So this is higher than what that time period shows.
So this is supposed to be a 10-minute presentation, but we do have 90 minutes if you want to go that long.
Okay. That was the danger of including that slide in the presentation. So yeah, this is the key question, right? Where will 36,000 additional people live, work, and play? Our existing zoning, giving all the boundaries that we have now, the existing zoning, the existing vacant land that we have now, we figure that we can accommodate about 33,000 of that 36,000 within the existing boundaries. The map shows sort of the larger blocks of developable land and also the urban villages, the 5 urban villages that we have plans for. So that's an important number to keep in mind, about 33,000 of that 36 if everything stays the same. So we've got a 3,000 person deficit, basically. It's about 1,500 dwelling units that we need to find a place for, and we can do that within the existing city boundaries, or we're looking at some of the areas immediately outside of the city to see if they're suitable for urban development. You can see the South U Street area then there at the bottom of the map, and then the north swath at the north side of the city. And one of the things we've been asking people is, what does your growth option look like? Every time we meet with a group or have an open house, this is one of the main questions that we ask folks. And we're compiling that information for you now. These are some pictures from the open house. We had about 120 people at the boathouse. Some of you were there. I think were all of you there? Yeah. So here are the community priorities that we've gleaned to date, and these are basically your legacies and strategic commitments. These are the foundation of the updated plan. Those are not obviously new to you. In terms of the survey results for the survey that we did, healthy environment, vibrant and sustainable economy, clean and safe drinking water got the most support. We're also looking at past growth trends. So the map on the left shows where the residential development has occurred since about 1990. The map on the right shows the urban villages that we have done plans for. And over 1,000 units, or 45% of all of the residential development that's occurred in the city since 2006 has occurred in those urban villages. We're also looking at demographics. We know that we're getting older. Those of us who are baby boomers can attest to that. We're getting older actually daily. We're becoming more diverse, and our family makeup is changing. And all of these have implications for our future planning. We've seen a tremendous demand for multifamily housing in this community. And so, is that going to continue? We know that houses are getting a little bit smaller finally. What will the demand be in the future? And the millennials will play a big part in that. The millennials, the people who are in their mid-20s to mid-30s, that's even a larger group than the baby boomers. Yeah, Michael?
Greg, that graph there, the incredible shrinking home, is that for detached, single-family detached?
Yes.
Okay. Because I assume if someone is living in a building like shown there, are those also getting smaller, or are they already smaller?
The attached.
Yeah, the attached.
They're smaller by design, yeah.
Yeah.
So the next steps in the update process, we have the April 23rd meeting with this group and the Planning Commission. And then, as I said, April and May are when the Planning Commission is really going to get to work on a UGA boundary and population growth forecast recommendation to you. June and July, you'll be working on those, and we'll get those to the county by the end of July. We're also planning to hold another open house this summer. And then the Planning Commission will begin work on the actual chapters of the plan the second half of this year. And the first 6 months of 16 is when the council will be taking up the actual chapters of the plan. Lots of ways to find out information about the comp plan update and to stay involved and submit comments. We are always accepting comments. So you can go to our website under comp plan and find out more information. You can email us or you can go onto the Engage website. As I said, we have 3 active annexation petitions. The one on the far right, East Bakerview, Mount Baker Highway, is the one that was recently initiated by the council. And then the Meridian Klein Kelly and the Bennett Bakerview Airport are older petitions that are still active. I expect that at least one of those will come to council for a final decision this year. Maybe all 3. And then we're updating our accessory dwelling unit ordinance. There's a provision in our code that says when we get to either 200 permitted units or 20 in any particular neighborhood, we need to do a review of the ordinance and see how it's working, and we've reached that threshold in the South Hill neighborhood. So we've begun meeting with neighborhoods, a focus group, and the Planning Commission just to identify issues that we found with our ADU ordinance, and we're also looking at what other communities are doing. Identifying opportunities for ADUs, providing housing choice, the financial benefit to a homeowner perhaps, and affordable infill housing are some of the opportunities or benefits that have been identified. And then the challenges, the illegal units that we have in enforcement, potential impacts on neighborhood character, everybody's favorite issue, parking. There's lots of information on ADUs on our website. You can just go to cob.org and search ADU ordinance update. You'll find lots of information there about ADUs and the process that we're using to update that ordinance. And then finally, the 3 neighborhood plan amendments that were docketed by council are working their way through the process. They've all been heard by the Planning Commission now, and the Planning Commission has forwarded recommendations. You'll be hearing the 2 on the right tonight, both of them located on Samish Way. And then the 3rd one on the far left on Ashley Street will be coming to you soon. And that is our work program. Questions, comments?
Dan.
On slide 2, there's a reference to changes in the law since 2006. I'm just wondering if you could briefly go over those.
I can cite a couple of examples. We have to provide for some policy language to address healthy communities. Healthy communities was added to the GMA. And also, another one that comes to mind right off the top is, I'm sorry, there we go, is we have to have land use policy. We have to make sure that we have land use policies and zoning around the airport that don't interfere with the operation of the airport. So we need to review our zoning regulations in the area around the airport, make sure we have a good policy base and zoning in place to not allow land uses that would interfere with the operation of the airport. So like really tall buildings or something in the flight path. And Rick, you mentioned one the other day that I didn't know about.
Oh, I think we're required by state law now to have a process to permit tent city.
That's right.
either through tent city. You have to have a process on your books in zoning to allow it, either conditionally or outright in some area. So our compliance is literally to walk through the changes in the law to make sure that our references are to the most current regulations and to incorporate these changes that we have to address. In doing so, we are always note these are state laws that we must include because it's in some cases there's no debate. One needs to include them in order to pass muster.
Okay, Michael?
Oh, that's right. You said there were several pending annexations. There's one in the northwest, one by the airport. Am I missing them? And are those going to fall into place anytime soon, do we think?
Let me get to that map for you. There they are. Those
Yeah,
are the
Klein
three
Kelly.
active petitions. I would expect that the Dewey Valley one will come to the council this year. The other two are dependent upon infrastructure improvements. The one at Bennett Bakerview, we need to have some answers for the overpass before we can bring that one forward and recommend that it be annexed. And then the Meridian Klein Kelly, it's a utility infrastructure that needs to be addressed. So the timing is uncertain with those two.
For the Bennett Bakerview annexation, is it a situation that if the northbound on-ramp rebuild happened, that would supply the necessary trigger so that could go forward? Or is it a situation where much more of the overpass has to be rebuilt?
Here comes the person with the answers.
Ted Carlson, Public Works Department. The potential northbound on-ramp certainly could be a possible solution to the issues that are around the overpass as it relates to the annexation. The state is working on a study right now. They call it their Bakerview to Grandview study that looks at that section of I-5 from Bakerview north to the Grandview interchange, but also goes east and west. In fact, it goes over to the guide, looks at that whole area, and is going to identify potential solutions to the major arterial networks, especially as they interplay with the interstate. One of the things that they're specifically looking at is the Bakerview interchange. At the same time, the city's going through a process with WashDOT called an interchange justification report, IJR, that will determine whether or not the northbound on-ramp on the east side of the interstate is, in fact, a viable solution. But you are correct. Once we identify the solutions, then we could feel comfortable bringing a recommendation to council. It wouldn't necessarily have to be funded or even on a funded in a 6-year period or something like that. But yet it would be a project that we could then look at the potential annexations and have them contribute a proportionate fair share to. Right now, we don't know what the solution is. We think it's the northbound on-ramp, but that has to be finalized. So you're correct.
How is the Bakerview to Grandview study, how is that different from the master plan that DOT did for the entire I-5 section through Whatcom County?
Yeah, it's looking at it in a little bit more detail. The master plan really did focus on the interchanges. This would look at things like east-west connectivity, something that the local jurisdictions and the COG, the Regional Planning Organization, are looking at as well. So you would look at, for instance, Smith Road. You would look at a potential east-west in the vicinity of Klein Kelly that we've talked a lot about, and what impacts those would have on existing interchanges like Bakerview and Slater. So it's going into a little finer grain than the master plan did. At the same time, it's looking at maybe less expensive options. The master plan really did focus on things like rebuilding interchanges, reconstructing the section of I-5 from Iowa, Sandwich Way through Iowa, $100 million projects that I think we're looking at. Is there a more reasonable solution financially that can get us most of the way there? A good example is the work we did on Bakerview a few summers ago, where we looked at the existing infrastructure and just tried to maximize it. The next stage in that at Bakerview is the northbound on-ramp, whereas the I-5 master plan that you're referencing called for a single point interchange at Bakerview that at the time was estimated to be around $50 million.
Yeah. Michael, follow up?
Yeah, it has to do with transportation. We're talking about the north side because east and west and south, there's really just no opportunities to expand the city, not into the bay, not into the lake, and not southward. So that's why we're talking about the north a lot and will be. And I'm wondering how much of our planning in that area will be affected by the county's discussions and our discussions with them having to do with Slater Road and the whole east-west connector transportation planning in the county, which is right at our edge and would either make northern development for us better or worse, depending on if it doesn't exist. So how much of our planning there on the north edge is tied to the county's transportation planning there on our north edge?
Well, I do think it's important, and so the county, along with the COG and the city, we're looking at the real benefits of an east-west connection. It was identified in the current comp plan as being very important, and I don't think that that's changed in any way. The stress on Bakerview, given everything that's happening there and will be happening there in the next couple of years, has really reached the point where further development of the north end, north of Bakerview, is probably not a real great option unless you have another east-west connection to get you over to, at the very least, Slater, to maximize that interchange. And in the long term, looking at, is there a possibility to do something at Smith or North? So I think it's very important. The county and the city are working closely on that, whether it's a Slater alignment, whether it's a Horton alignment, whether it's a combination of a Slater, Kelly, or Klein alignment. We know that getting from northwest, essentially access to I-5 at Slater, over to the guide is very important as we look at future development north of Bakerview.
I don't think I want to ask this question. I'm going to ask it anyway. The whole issue about tying Cordata into, the upper portion of Cordata or Kitech into, Slater or into the freeway itself, what purpose is that having in terms of the overall traffic patterns when most of the traffic is actually going into downtown area, into the rest of the city going south, versus the traffic demands of anybody going north towards Blaine or Ferndale or Canada?
Yeah, that's part of the modeling that needs to happen right now. In fact, looking at, that's one of the things the COG, the COG is responsible for doing the regional modeling, and the city works very closely with them on the regional transportation model, and we're working with private folks as well on that. That's one of the things that has to be looked at so we get more clarity on. We know Bakerview interchange and Bakerview corridor itself is getting very close to being at its maximum, with what we know will happen over the 5-year period. So whether people are going south into downtown or getting to the interstate and going south beyond downtown or going north, that modeling, destination planning, where are people going, is very important, because even if people are going south, if they had the opportunity to get over to the interstate or to Northwest or somewhere aside from going down Cordata Parkway to Bakerview, there's some value there. And so determining exactly where those trips are going is important. That's something that, as we know, land use and transportation are working hand in hand. And as we better understand population estimates, as we better understand the land use, then we plug that into the transportation model, knowing what we know from all the studies that have already occurred, and we'll have a better feel for just how much of a benefit that east-west connection has.
Okay. Thanks, Ted. Yeah. Any other questions? I had a couple. Going back to the airport, you mentioned the airport planning, Greg. Are we looking at possibly changing the decibel contours of what the impacts are to the runway itself, and as it pertains to our planning goals?
Excuse me, I don't believe so, no. Those levels are set by the FAA, and the port already owns property, even on the east side of I-5, that takes those contour areas in, so.
My understanding is that the FAA sets the minimum, but it doesn't necessarily set anything where local jurisdictions can plan for, a lower decibel count so that you'd have a better buffer to the impacts of you know, whatever development happens. And then the other thing too, that I know that has been discussed, whether or not there would be a requirement in those other areas to you know, to put on title about the fact that you are next to an airport, just so that this, you know, sort of buyer beware type of thing, so that we don't have to go and deal with some of those noise complaints. Michael?
I'm glad you brought this up. This is a lot like the county transportation planning on a northern border. We're really worried about what's around the city because we have so few places to grow, and out towards the airport is one possibility. I'm wondering, do you know if the county is considering, what are the the CCPs, the countywide planning policies? CPPs, countywide planning policies. What are the current CPPs for the airport? Are they considering new CPPs for the airport specifically to address those noise issues so that we, in the future, if we grow in that direction, there's already kind of like guidance on how those noise impacts will be you know, dealt with, that maybe certain regions for development will be sort of disfavored because there's airport noise there. We don't want to give the wrong impression that here's a great place to put housing when it's in a flight path.
Yeah, I don't believe the county is considering any changes to the policies. Most of the area that's adjacent to the city limits near the airport is already developed. This area is mostly developed.
Kind of low density though, isn't it?
No.
No?
No, there's some apartment complexes. It developed over the years with our utilities, and the county put in zoning that allowed urban levels of development. And then up more towards the airport to the north is all industrial zoning in there. So you're not going to see a lot of additional development in that area.
Okay, so here's my softball question to you. Assuming you had more resources, what other long-term planning activities or projects do you think that should be next on the docket for, you know, the section of the Department for Long-Term Planning?
You want to address that, boss?
Well, I think what's going to happen, it's premature for us to speculate till we complete the comp plan update, because we've identified a number of threads that if they prevail, we'll really want to focus on. There are, what we're finding is there are small victories that could be achieved by looking at aspects of our code in terms of house type and integration and development standards, and I think we want to enumerate those and see which ones have the best yield. So I think likely would be is in June of next year, 16, we finish the comp plan. We'll have identified sort of the next zen of things we need to fully implement it. And the reason I'm hesitating now is because we're in a public process to say what's our focus, where should we be putting our energies and choices, and I think that would inform the best answer to that.
Okay, that's fair. Any other questions? Well, with that, I will take this information to the council tonight, including the quote, "We're getting older daily." Is that what it says?
That's what it feels like.
All right. Thank you all. Meeting adjourned.